Officer refuses black man's plea for help as he approaches the officer in a public space, his face showing signs of distress. The man, in need of assistance, steps forward, hoping for some kind of help. He speaks up, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Officer, I really need help," he says, hoping for a sympathetic response. The officer looks him up and down with indifference. "Not my problem," the officer replies dismissively, barely even acknowledging the man's words. "Go talk to someone else." The man, still calm but frustrated, tries again. "Please, I really need assistance. There's been an issue, and I don't know where to turn." The officer scoffs, rolling his eyes. "Whatever," he mutters, as he turns to walk away, completely ignoring the man's situation. What happens when a man, desperate for help, is ignored by the wrong officer? You won't believe what happens when this man reveals his true identity and how everything changes. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. The black man stands there calmly, his posture unshaken by the officer's obvious disregard for him. He had hoped for a little help, something simple. But the officer's cold dismissal is a sharp contrast to his own composed demeanor. He doesn't let his frustration show. Instead, he remains polite, even though the officer is making it clear that he's not worth the officer's time. On the outside, the man looks like just another person trying to navigate through a tough situation. He's dressed simply, his face a little tired but not defeated, and he appears like anyone else would in his place, looking for assistance. There's nothing extraordinary about his appearance to an outsider, just a man who needs help and is asking for it. But despite this calm and humble exterior, there is something more beneath the surface that sets him apart. His voice is steady as he speaks to the officer, but there's a glimmer in his eyes that says he's been through things that have made him stronger. Though he doesn't show it outwardly, his composure hints at a deeper well of resilience, something the officer has yet to recognize. The officer, however, doesn't take the time to notice these subtle hints. He sizes the man up quickly, assuming that because of his race and his appearance, he must not be of any importance. To the officer, this is just another black man who's probably causing trouble. He doesn't see a person who deserves respect, help, or dignity. Instead, he sees someone he believes should be dismissed, someone whose problems don't matter. With a glance, the officer dismisses him. There's no attempt to understand or engage, just an arrogant, dismissive attitude that shows the officer's prejudices at work. Without even listening to the man's request, the officer cuts him off and refuses to offer any assistance. This attitude is nothing new for the officer. He's grown comfortable in assuming that people like the black man, people he sees as lesser, don't deserve his help. This arrogance has become second nature for him, a way to assert power and control over those he deems unworthy of respect. What the officer doesn't realize, though, is that this man is not someone he can easily disregard. There's so much more to him than what meets the eye. And soon, the officer will find out just how wrong he is. The black man approaches the officer, a hint of frustration in his eyes but his posture calm, trying his best to remain composed. He had encountered a small issue, maybe a misunderstanding or confusion, but nothing too alarming. He approaches the officer not with anger, but with the simple hope of getting some assistance. As he steps forward, he begins to explain the situation politely. Perhaps he's lost, or maybe there's something wrong with his car, or he's simply asking for directions. It's a minor thing, but it's something he can't solve on his own. "I need help with a minor thing, sir," he says, his voice even and respectful. But there's a subtle urgency in his tone. He doesn't expect the officer to be overly kind, but a simple acknowledgement or assistance would have sufficed. But the officer, with his arms crossed and a dismissive expression on his face, barely even looks at the man. He simply waves him off and replies, "I don't have time for you." The words hit the black man like a ton of bricks. It's the kind of treatment he's sadly grown used to, but he still couldn't understand why. Why was it always like this? Why was it always a struggle to get the most basic help from those who are supposed to serve the public? The officer doesn't even attempt to hear him out. He's already made up his mind that this man is not worth his time. "Just move along," he snaps, his tone dripping with impatience. His body language, arms crossed, a tilt of the head, shows all the signs of someone who is not willing to listen, but instead is looking for an excuse to be dismissive. The black man tries again, his voice staying calm, but clearly tinged with frustration. "I'm just asking for a few directions, or some advice on where to go. It's not a big deal," he says, maintaining his composure. He's still trying to remain respectful, but this situation is beginning to feel more and more hostile. He knows he shouldn't have to beg for something so simple, but the officer's demeanor doesn't soften. If anything, it hardens. "You're wasting my time," the officer sneers. He doesn't even make eye contact. It's as if the black man is invisible to him, not even worthy of acknowledgement. The officer's dismissive behavior intensifies, and now the black man can feel the sting of the officer's condescension. The more he tries to explain himself, the more the officer interrupts, refusing to hear him out. The situation, which began as something so trivial, begins to escalate. The officer's hostility increases, and the black man can feel his blood pressure rising. The officer's treatment of him is unfair, and he knows it. But he doesn't want to escalate the situation even further. He's learned the hard way that arguing with someone in authority often only leads to more trouble, especially when that authority is determined to flex its power unjustly. The officer, completely ignoring the black man's calm attempts to resolve the issue, gets even more aggressive. The officer's words become sharper, more accusatory, and more unnecessarily harsh. His dismissive attitude has turned into outright disrespect. Now, he's questioning the man's very right to be there, implying that somehow the black man is in the wrong. It's an act of blatant disregard for the black man's dignity, and it stings more than anything else. A small crowd has gathered, some people pulling out their phones to record what's happening, but most are standing silently, unsure if they should intervene. The tension in the air is palpable, and the black man feels more and more isolated. No one steps forward to offer help, even though they can see the officer's unreasonable behavior. They hesitate, unsure of how to get involved, and that makes him feel even smaller. As the situation escalates, the black man tries his best to remain composed. He's frustrated, yes, but he's also aware that his actions will either diffuse the situation or make it worse. Yet no matter how calm he remains, the officer continues to escalate things for reasons that have nothing to do with the actual situation. It's clear now that the officer is targeting him simply because of his race. He's treating the black man as inferior, just as he has probably done with so many others before. This isn't just about an issue with directions anymore. It's about power, race, and an officer's abuse of authority. The black man can feel the injustice of the situation, and though his frustration is building, he doesn't let it get the best of him. He stands there, calmly, enduring the officer's hostility, knowing that this is just another example of how people in power sometimes treat others unfairly. The officer's behavior intensifies as he continues to dismiss the black man, growing more hostile with every passing second. His attitude becomes increasingly condescending, and he starts belittling the man in front of the growing crowd. "What are you even doing here?" he asks with a sneer, his words dripping with disdain. "You're not even supposed to be in this area. What's your business, huh?" His voice is laced with contempt, and it's clear he's not interested in any explanation. The black man, despite the officer's mounting hostility, remains composed. He takes a deep breath, trying to stay calm. His posture is straight, his hands at his sides, ready to handle the situation with dignity. However, his calmness only seems to fuel the officer's aggression. The officer, unable to rattle him with his words, begins to raise his voice even more. "You think you can just waltz in here and do whatever you want?" he snaps. "This isn't the place for people like you. Do you understand?" The words hit the black man like a slap in the face, but he doesn't flinch. He stands tall, refusing to let the officer provoke him. "I'm just asking for some help," the man tries to explain, his voice steady, but laced with a sense of frustration that he can't fully suppress. "I'm not here to cause any trouble." But the officer isn't listening. The man's words fall on deaf ears as the officer continues to bark insults. As the situation escalates, bystanders begin to take notice. A few people pull out their phones and start recording the confrontation. But most people simply stand still, too afraid to get involved. Some look at the scene in silence, their faces showing concern, but they don't speak up. They know the officer has the upper hand, and any attempt to intervene could lead to their own troubles. Others avoid eye contact altogether, pretending not to notice the tension building in front of them. The crowd grows, but the sense of collective powerlessness is palpable. The officer's actions are beginning to draw more attention, but not the kind of attention he expected. His temper is flaring, and with each word he speaks he becomes more aggressive. "I'm done with you. I've had enough of your attitude," the officer says, stepping closer to the black man, invading his personal space. His hands twitch, likely itching to escalate the confrontation further. But the black man remains calm, standing his ground. He knows all too well that in situations like this, losing control could mean trouble. Despite his inner frustration, the black man keeps his voice steady. "I'm just asking for your help. There's no reason for this to escalate," he says. His tone is firm, but his frustration is becoming harder to mask. "You're treating me like I'm a criminal, and I haven't done anything wrong." The officer sneers. "You're already acting like one by wasting my time." The words sting, and for a moment, the black man can feel the weight of the officer's prejudice. He knows that in the officer's mind, his race is enough of a reason to assume guilt. It's something he's had to endure all his life. Being judged, dismissed, and treated as inferior without any justification. As the situation grows even more tense, the bystanders remain silent, watching the scene unfold without taking action. Some of them record the incident, but few step forward. They're all too familiar with the power dynamics at play. They see the officer's hostility, but they know the risk of speaking up could be too great. The black man is standing alone, his calm demeanor the only thing protecting him from the officer's aggression. Inside, his frustration is building. He wants to lash out, to call out the officer for his disrespect. But he knows better. He's been in situations like this before. The consequences of reacting the wrong way are too high. His mind races, trying to think of a way out of this escalating situation. But he knows that maintaining his composure is the only way forward. The officer, seeing the black man's unwavering calm, tries to provoke him further. He steps even closer, his words now dripping with arrogance. "I'm giving you one last chance," the officer warns. "Leave now, or I'll make sure you regret it." The black man stands his ground. His chest rises and falls with each breath, but his face remains steady. He won't let this officer break him. He knows that the more he shows his frustration, the more the officer will feel empowered to continue. His hands are clenched at his sides, his body poised, ready for whatever comes next. He knows this moment may define how the rest of this encounter plays out. The black man takes a slow, deliberate breath, sensing the tension in the air, and, with quiet confidence, he begins to reveal the truth. His voice remains calm, but there's an undeniable authority in it. "You know," he starts, looking the officer straight in the eye, "you've been misjudging me this whole time. I'm not just some random person you can treat this way." The officer, still standing with a puffed chest and an air of superiority, pauses. His eyes narrow slightly, not quite understanding what the man is implying. "What's that supposed to mean?" the officer asks, his tone a mix of confusion and growing irritation. He's already made up his mind about the man and doesn't expect anything to change. The black man continues, his voice steady but firm. "I'm the CEO of a successful company," he says, his words striking with power, "and I don't take kindly to being disrespected, especially not like this." The officer's posture immediately shifts. The arrogance that once radiated from him falters, and a flicker of panic enters his eyes. His hand instinctively goes to his radio, perhaps trying to call for backup, but his brain seems to freeze. The smugness disappears, replaced by uncertainty. For the first time, the officer looks at the black man not as someone to control or dismiss, but as someone with real power. His mouth opens as though to say something, but no words come out immediately. A long pause stretches between them, and the officer's expression is one of disbelief. The man watches him closely, his calm demeanor unbroken. He knows the officer's sudden shift isn't from concern, but from fear. Fear that he's just crossed a line he can't come back from. As the reality sets in, the officer starts to stammer, his voice no longer commanding. I didn't know," he mutters, his previous bravado gone. His eyes dart around, looking for an escape or for someone to back him up, but no one is coming to his aid. The situation has completely turned in the man's favor, and the officer knows he has made a grave mistake. Now, scrambling, the officer hastily apologizes, his tone apologetic, but clearly panicked. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean, I wasn't aware. I apologize for any inconvenience." His hands begin to tremble slightly, and his entire demeanor is in stark contrast to the arrogance he had shown earlier. The authority he once held seems to slip away, as he realizes just how wrong he was to treat this man with such disrespect. The black man stands tall, his expression still composed. His eyes remain fixed on the officer, who now seems smaller in comparison to the man's quiet strength and authority. "Your apology is noted," the black man says, his voice clear but lacking any hint of anger. "But your actions were unacceptable." The officer stutters again, his face reddening as he tries to explain himself, but his words fall flat. The damage has already been done. The black man, who had been so calmly mistreated just moments ago, now holds the upper hand. The officer, once so confident in his power, now stands humbled, unable to undo the disrespect he had shown. The black man stands still, allowing the officer to digest the truth. There's no rush, no need to make the officer feel worse. The situation has already shifted. The officer's reaction speaks volumes. His panic, his scrambling to recover, and his visible unease show just how quickly power can shift when one's true identity is revealed. The black man turns to walk away, his steps steady and full of purpose. The officer is left standing there, still stunned, realizing that he's not just humiliated in front of one person, but in front of everyone who had been silently observing. His pride, once so strong, is shattered, and there's nothing he can do to fix it. The black man leaves the officer behind, his authority now undeniable and unchallenged. The black man stands firm, his posture tall and unwavering. The officer, still reeling from the revelation of his true identity, stands there, unsure of what to do next. The once confident, authoritative officer is now visibly shaken, his earlier aggression replaced by a sense of guilt. With a calm, measured tone, the black man speaks. "What you did was not only wrong, it was completely unacceptable." He pauses for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. No one should be treated that way, especially not by someone in your position. The officer, now realizing the gravity of his actions, stumbles over his words. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean to." His voice trails off as he struggles to find an excuse, but his apologies sound hollow in the face of the man's calm assertion of authority. The black man cuts him off, his voice firm but controlled. "Your apologies don't change what happened, but I will make sure your actions are addressed. No one is above being held accountable for their behavior, especially not you, with your badge." The officer, now completely deflated, starts apologizing again, his voice full of regret. "I'm sorry, sir. I really didn't mean to disrespect you. I should have treated you with more respect." His words are rushed, almost frantic, as if he's trying to undo the damage he's caused. But the black man doesn't react with anger or frustration. Instead, he stands there with dignity, his calm presence commanding the respect the officer had failed to offer him earlier. He looks the officer directly in the eyes, and without a word, he begins to walk away, his steps confident and resolute. The officer stands there, speechless, watching as the man walks off. He feels the humiliation of his actions weighing heavily on him. For the first time, he realizes the full extent of his mistake. The situation has completely shifted, and he is left to grapple with the fact that his abuse of power was not only called out, but addressed by someone far more powerful and composed than he had ever anticipated. The black man continues to walk away, his dignity intact, leaving the officer standing there, unable to regain control of the situation. The silence between them speaks volumes. The officer's inability to recover from the encounter only underscores the man's quiet strength and the officer's profound mistake. The crowd that had gathered during the altercation watches in stunned silence as the black man walks away, his calmness and authority leaving an indelible impression. The officer, now humiliated and powerless, watches the man disappear into the distance, knowing he has lost far more than just an argument. He has lost his sense of control and his dignity. The black man leaves the scene with his head held high, the situation resolved without a single outburst or loss of composure, leaving the officer to confront the consequences of his own actions. The news of the encounter between the black man and the police officer spreads quickly across social media platforms. Videos of the incident are shared widely, sparking discussions about racial bias, police misconduct, and the abuse of power that has been so pervasive in law enforcement. The man's calm demeanor in the face of such blatant disrespect becomes a symbol of dignity and strength for many who have experienced similar mistreatment. Within hours, news outlets pick up the story, adding more fuel to the fire. People from all walks of life begin to share their opinions, with the majority expressing outrage at the officer's behavior. Calls for reform in the police force echo across social media, with many demanding greater accountability for officers who abuse their power. Discussions start to intensify, with activists, politicians, and ordinary citizens all pushing for changes that would prevent such incidents from happening again. The black man's identity, initially hidden, is revealed to the public. His role as a highly influential figure within the community, and his status as someone with immense authority, now take center stage. The story about his mistreatment by the officer becomes a powerful example of how even people in positions of power can face injustice simply because of their race. Social media platforms explode with posts urging people to stand up for justice and fight against the kind of prejudice the man experienced. People share their personal stories, their frustrations with systemic racism, and their support for the man's call for change. The hashtag #JusticeForAll begins trending as it becomes a rallying cry for those demanding equality in policing and society. The man, now with a much larger platform, takes full advantage of his influence to advocate for justice. He makes a public statement addressing the need for equality and fairness in all areas of life, especially within law enforcement. Using his position, he pushes for policies and reforms that would hold police officers accountable for their actions. His goal is clear: to ensure that no one, regardless of race or social standing, is treated with such disrespect again. He calls for the implementation of training programs for police officers to address racial bias, for greater transparency in police conduct, and for policies that promote accountability and fairness. We need to create a society where every person is treated with dignity and respect, he says in his speech. No one should have to fear being disrespected or mistreated simply because of the color of their skin or their background. The story becomes a defining moment in the fight for racial justice, with the man's leadership inspiring others to push for change in their own communities. As more and more people rally behind the call for reform, the incident becomes a symbol of the power of standing up for what's right, even when facing an unjust system. The man's actions and the overwhelming public response make it clear that this is only the beginning of a larger movement. The call for justice, fairness, and accountability in policing continues to grow louder as more people join the fight for equality. The story ends with a powerful message that resonates with everyone who has ever felt marginalized or disrespected. It reminds us all that the foundation of a just society is built on the principles of respect, dignity, and fairness for everyone, regardless of their race, background, or social status. The lesson is simple, yet profound. No matter who you are, everyone deserves to be treated with respect. This story shows that skin color, ethnicity, or social position should never determine how a person is treated by others, especially those in power. The black man in this story, despite being wrongly judged and mistreated, stood firm and demanded the respect he deserved, illustrating that no one should ever accept being treated as less than. Another important lesson emphasized in this story is the need for holding those in positions of power accountable for their actions. The officer's behavior was a direct result of his unchecked power and prejudices. However, the man's unwavering confidence and insistence on justice ensured that the officer's actions did not go unnoticed. Accountability is crucial in preventing abuse of power and ensuring fairness, not only in the police force, but in every system where authority figures hold sway over others. The story also highlights the courage of standing up for what is right, even when facing authority. The man could have easily walked away, accepting the officer's disrespect. Instead, he chose to speak out and demand accountability, showing that speaking up and standing up for what is right can bring about change. Sometimes it takes just one person to challenge injustice and inspire others to follow suit. By standing his ground and using his position to advocate for justice, the man reminded everyone that fighting for what is right can lead to a ripple effect that transforms systems, institutions, and even hearts and minds. His actions weren't just about his personal experience, but about the broader fight for equality and dignity in society. This story serves as a reminder that justice is not a privilege, but a right that everyone should enjoy, and that standing up for fairness can lead to meaningful change, no matter the obstacles. It's a call to action for everyone to take a stand against inequality, to speak out when they witness injustice, and to use their voice to inspire others to do the same.